to commemorate the involvement of Aaron John Miller in the event that would come to be known as the Boston Tea Party. I'd like to thank, of course, everyone who's made today possible, the entire town, and Converse, of course, with Ludlow, the DAR, the SAR, veterans assembled here today, police officers, and everyone who's come out today to be a part of this great event and commemorating Ludlow's involvement in the Boston Tea Party. I'd also like to thank Kristen Harris, our research coordinator, for all of the research work, my good friend and colleague Jonathan Lane from Revolution 250, and again, everyone that's made today possible. Our museum is working in partnership with Revolution 250 on commemorating the upcoming 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party next December in 2023. We are working on a commemorative year of programming, special exhibits, theatrical performances, lectures, speaker series, and of course ceremonies like today, where we take a moment to honor those involved in an event that would come to define a nation. Now, of course, the Boston Tea Party took place on December 16th, 1773. And it is an event that is remembered and reenacted, not just here in Massachusetts, but actually around the world. John Adams would call it the most magnificent movement of all. And even Royal Governor Thomas Hutchinson, sensing its great importance, would call it the boldest stroke yet struck in America. Its principles and values speak through the generations, and ideas of protesting against injustice and tyranny are still things that we can relate to, even just shy of 250 years later. Many of us know the basic facts. The arrival of 3 ships carrying East India Company tea between November 28th and December 15th, 1773, would lead to widespread protests and non-importation efforts, not just in Boston, but across the colony of Massachusetts. Several town meetings took place at Old South Meeting House and Faneuil Hall. Ultimately, it was there the decision was made to seal the fate of all 340 chests of tea in Boston Harbor. Men would loosely disguise themselves, march down to Griffin's Wharf, break open these tea chests, and shake the loose leaf tea. Every single last leaf must have been destroyed in the icy waters of Boston Harbor that evening. And while no official count exists, it is believed that between 100 to 150 individuals took part in the destruction of the tea. And there has always been an air of mystery and secrecy surrounding who was involved in this brave action. After all, in the eyes of the British authority, this event was treason. In the years after, the event was not celebrated, certainly not like we do today. In fact, the term Boston Tea Party was not first published until 1826. To make the research more difficult, many of the participants swore an oath of secrecy, never to reveal the names of any one part of this brave action. But of course, while many held true to those oaths until their death, some clearly did not. And I think the very fact that we're all assembled here today is testament to that. Now, the gentleman that we are all here to honor today, Dr. Aaron John Miller, would have been 24 years of age on the night of December 16, 1773. He was originally born in West Springfield near Hampton, Massachusetts in 1749 and eventually moved here to Ludlow. He enlisted during the Revolutionary War, enlisting in April of 1775. Immediately after the Battle of Lexington, Ed would serve in Colonel Danielson's Massachusetts regiment for 10 months as a surgeon's mate. According to his pension request from his children upon his death, he served until August of 1775 and then became ill, and being unable to perform his duties, was furloughed. He tried to make it back to his home, but was waylaid in Worcester briefly, unable to continue due to his illness. When his strength returned, he was able to make it to his father's house here in Ludlow, where he was bedridden for almost 30 days from what is described in his pension records as a bilious malignant fever. When his health returned, he was able to return to Roxbury in December of 75 or January of 76. He was then discharged, but instead of returning home, he stayed and offered his services to the Army right up until the evacuation of Boston by British troops. He would return and become known as the first physician of Ludlow, Massachusetts. From a history of the town of Ludlow, dated 1875, Aaron John Miller is again described as the first physician in the town and states the following quotation from Palmer Journal that illustrates the man as a very tidy sort of gentleman, distinguished for wearing the highest priced black broadcloth that he could find, and always eating molasses instead of butter on his bread. drinking clear tea, never any water. He was a rapid talker, made his fever powders of camphor gum and loaf sugar, and was never known to hurt his patients with these medicines. He usually walked to all of his visits accompanied by a small yellow dog. It is sometimes said that he was often intolerant of other opinions, and to emphasize his own, he would do so with frequent thrusts of his cane. Seems like a man filled with revolutionary spirit. And this revolutionary spirit of Dr. Allen John Miller can still be found throughout Ludlow and in many communities across Massachusetts, as the actions of the Boston Tea Party participants reverberate as strongly today as it did in 1773. The majority of these names are hardly if ever mentioned, with those we routinely talk about during times of historical commemoration. But Dr. Allen John Miller is just as important to the formative years of our nation as the names we're already familiar with, like Paul Revere, Samuel Adams, John Hancock, John Adams. The Boston Tea Party participants were largely common tradesmen, common laborers, barrel makers, shipwrights, wallpaperers, house painters. These supposedly ordinary citizens did extraordinary things, and they are more than worthy of our recognition. So, it is our ultimate goal that by the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, a commemorative marker, like what we're about to place here in this beautiful cemetery, will be placed at the grave of every known Boston Tea Party participant across the nation. They are buried as far north as the border of Maine and Canada, as far south as Alexandria, Virginia, and as far west as Cincinnati, Ohio. Our hope is that markers such as this one, in burying grounds like this beautiful one, will be a place where we can all stop and think about the importance, but quote-unquote ordinary citizens that are inexplicably tied to the formative years of our region and our nation. Thank you very much. And now, before we place the marker, I invite Jonathan Lane from Revolution 250.
Nothing to me speaks more about the changes in generations than knowing we've gone from molasses on toast to avocado on toast. I want to throw that out there. Welcome everyone. As Evan said, I'm Jonathan Lane. I'm the coordinator of Revolution 250, which is a consortium of more than 70 organizations working across the Commonwealth to prepare and commemorate and educate around the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. We have been working hard since 2015. Yes, that's when our first event was, back at the formation of the Sons of Liberty and the Stamp Act protest in Boston. And as Evan so eloquently said, we are here to celebrate the lives of ordinary people. And I'm going to start my little spiel with an acknowledgement to all of you who have served our country or are currently serving our country either in public safety or in the state legislature or on a town committee, because that really is at the heart of what this story is. It is, and nobody should know it better than the people of Ludlow, whose town is really founded at the very cusp of American independence. And if you read through the early pages of the town records of Ludlow, it starts, of course, with their declaration of township, which was passed by the legislature. And then it starts with the business of the day, which is who's going to be Hargreave, which is a town job, by the way, I think is long overdue to be revived. Deer Reeve and all kinds of leather sealer. Who wouldn't want to do that? But all of you who serve or have family members who serve, you are the extraordinary people of this generation. And when we talk about the people from the 1770s who fought for American liberty and American independence, we want to tell as broad a picture as we can. So we want to honor the lives of those who participated in the Boston Tea Party or marched on Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775, or defended Bunker Hill against the thousands of British soldiers who marched up it on that June 17th day in the heat, or marched with Washington all over the mid-Atlantic and fought for American rights and liberties. But we also want to remember a different perspective on the history. We want to remember the people who supported the British Crown. And we want to remember them because they are our neighbors. They're our friends. One year, and then the next year, they're on a different side. We want to remember the thousands of prisoners of war who lived in Massachusetts, who were from England and Ireland and Germany and France, who were kept by communities all across the Commonwealth. We want to remember the freed and enslaved Africans who both fought for American liberty and independence, but also those who fought against, because they saw the British Empire as their personal way to emancipation. We want to remember the indigenous peoples, again, on both sides of the conflict. A lot of people don't know the very first treaty the Provincial Congress of Massachusetts ever engaged was a treaty with Native people from Maine. And there are hundreds of indigenous people from the western part of Massachusetts who went and fought at the Siege of Boston, acting as scouts and collectors of information and material of war. We want to remember the people in naval service. We don't often think of the American Revolution as a naval war, but navies and the water were how the vast majority of goods and services were transported. So we want to remember the people who served on Continental Navy ships, Massachusetts privateers in the Massachusetts Navy, which a lot of people don't even know. Massachusetts at one time had its own Navy, and it's during this time period. So we aspire to a greater vision. And we also want to think about the women and children who are left behind. Massachusetts had more men in the field of battle than any of the other colonies every year of the war, and it's an 8-year war, except for 2. And that was during the siege of Yorktown and the year after. With all those men gone, it fell to the women and children and those who were over the age of 60 left behind to not just support the family farm, not just to keep the towns running, not to keep the industry booming, but actually having to go above and beyond to support their families and to support the men in the field. So let's remember those people during this commemoration. I look forward to welcoming you all at all of the events that we're looking at doing between now and July 2026, which of course will be the 250th anniversary of American independence. The story of the Revolution, as I'm sure everybody here knows, goes far beyond that date. So when you as a community discuss about how you want to remember the 250th anniversary, definitely look at the 250th birthday of America. Absolutely. That's a date that everybody can remember. But look beyond it as well, because your story, Ludlow's story, is actually much deeper than that. Thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing you over the next few years.